The gallows stood empty in the dusty square of Idaho City, Idaho, but to Dia Larson, it may as well have had her name carved into the weathered wood. The murmurs of the crowd gathered outside the mercantile had grown louder with each passing day, like a pot of water slowly reaching its boiling point. It was 1876, and a woman with opinions as sharp as Dahlia's was considered more dangerous than a rattlesnake in a nursery. "You've gone too far this time, Miss Larson." Mayor Holloway's jowls quivered as he jabbed a thick finger in her direction. The town council meeting had devolved into chaos after Dahlia had stood up and boldly questioned why the mining company was allowed to dump waste into the creek that supplied water to the eastern farms. "I'm merely pointing out that people are getting sick and their livestock is dying," Dahlia replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. At 26, she had grown accustomed to the disapproving stares. Her father had left her the town's only newspaper when he passed 3 years prior, and she'd used it as her voice ever since. "That mining company brings prosperity to Idaho City," Councilman Peters shouted over the din. "Your radical ideas and that newspaper of yours are stirring up trouble where there isn't any." Dahlia stood her ground, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "People deserve to know the truth. The Sinclair Mining Company is poisoning our water, and someone has to speak up." The meeting erupted again, angry voices drowning out any attempt at reason. Mayor Holloway finally slammed his gavel down so hard it splintered. "Enough. Miss Larson, your father was a respected member of this community, God rest his soul. But you have turned his legacy into a weapon against progress. The council has deliberated, and we've reached a decision." He pulled a document from his breast pocket. "You are hereby ordered to cease publication of the Idaho City Chronicle and leave town within 3 days. Should you fail to comply, your property will be seized for unpaid taxes, which we have recalculated." A ripple of shocked whispers coursed through the room. Even those who disagreed with Dahlia hadn't expected such a severe judgment. "You can't do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My taxes are paid in full." "Not according to our new assessment," Councilman Peters smiled coldly, sliding a paper across the table. "You owe $500, due immediately." It might as well have been $5,000. They knew she didn't have that kind of money. The mining company had convinced most businesses to stop advertising in her paper months ago. As the meeting disbanded, Dahlia stood alone in the emptying town hall, clutching the eviction notice with white knuckles. She didn't notice the tall figure lingering in the shadowed corner until he approached, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "Quite a speech you gave," the man said, his voice low like distant thunder. "Reckon they didn't take too kindly to it." Dahlia looked up into eyes the color of a summer storm. She recognized him vaguely, one of the men who worked at the Quinn ranch outside of town. She'd seen him riding in occasionally for supplies. "Mr. Quinn, isn't it?" she asked, quickly wiping away the moisture that had gathered in her eyes. "Drake Quinn," he corrected, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed out of place in the wake of what had just happened. "My uncle owns the ranch. I just work there." "Well, Mr. Quinn, as you can see, the town council and I have different views on journalism." She tried to inject some lightness into her voice, but it cracked on the last word. Drake Quinn studied her for a long moment. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His expression was difficult to read, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't present in the rest of the town's respect, perhaps. "I've read your paper," he said finally. "Every word. You're right about the water. Our southern pasture borders that creek, and we've lost 8 head of cattle this month alone." Dahlia blinked in surprise. She'd been gathering evidence, testimonies from farmers and ranchers, but many were too afraid of the mining company's influence to go on record. "Would you be willing to make a statement about that? For the paper?" she asked, hope flaring briefly. Drake's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Doesn't seem like there's going to be a paper anymore, Miss Larson." The reality crashed back over her. 3 days to pack up her life, her father's printing press, everything she owned. "No, I suppose not," she conceded, shoulders slumping. "What will you do?" Drake asked, placing his hat back atop his head. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have family in Denver. Perhaps I could start again there." Drake nodded, seeming to consider something. Denver's a fine city, getting bigger every day. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Larson, I'll be in town tomorrow if you need any help with preparations." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she replied, though she doubted their paths would cross again. The next morning, Dahlia began the painful process of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The printing press was too heavy for her to transport. She would have to sell it, though who in Idaho City would buy it now was a mystery. Most of her father's books would have to stay behind as well. The thought of leaving his precious collection brought fresh tears to her eyes. She was wrapping the framed photograph of her parents in a piece of cloth when a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found Drake Quinn on her porch, hat in hand. "Mr. Quinn," she said, surprised to see him. "Miss Larson," he nodded. "I thought you might need some help." "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "I've got a wagon outside, and I'm handy with heavy lifting." Dahlia hesitated. She barely knew this man, yet here he was offering help when the rest of the town had turned its back on her. "I don't have much money to pay you," she admitted. Drake's expression softened. "I'm not asking for payment, Miss Larson, just trying to be neighborly." Reluctantly, she stepped aside to let him in. Her small house was in disarray, boxes and trunks half-packed, piles of books and papers scattered everywhere. "I've been trying to sort through my father's things," she explained, embarrassed by the chaos. "It's hard to decide what's worth taking." Drake nodded, surveying the room. "How about I start with the heavier items? That bookcase looks like it might fetch a good price." They worked in companionable silence for a while. Drake was methodical and efficient, carefully wrapping the more delicate items and constructing sturdy crates for books and dishware. Dahlia found herself stealing glances at him as he worked. There was something compelling about the quiet intensity he brought to even this simple task. "May I ask you something, Mr. Quinn?" she ventured after some time had passed. He looked up from the chair he was wrapping. "Drake, please." "And yes, you may, Drake," she amended. "Why are you helping me? Most people in this town would cross the street to avoid being associated with me right now." He considered her question, taking his time to formulate an answer. "I believe in what you're doing," he said finally. "Standing up for the truth, even when it's unpopular, that takes courage." Dahlia wasn't used to receiving praise for the very thing that had made her an outcast. "Thank you," she said softly. "Besides," he added with a hint of a smile, "I never much cared what most people think." As the day wore on, they made progress. Drake loaded several pieces of furniture into his wagon to be sold, promising to return with whatever money they fetched. Dahlia found herself growing more comfortable in his presence, even sharing stories about her father and the early days of the newspaper. "He taught me everything about printing," she said, running her hand over the cast iron press that dominated one corner of the front room. "I was setting type before I could properly write my letters." "You love it," Drake observed. "The newspaper, I mean." "It's all I've ever wanted to do," she admitted. "Give voice to the voiceless, shine light on injustice. My father used to say a good newspaper comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. And now the comfortable are pushing back, Drake said, his expression darkening. It appears so. As evening approached, Drake helped her secure the house before departing. I'll return tomorrow, he promised. We can load what you're taking then. Dahlia nodded, unexpectedly grateful for his steady presence during this tumultuous time. Thank you, Drake, truly. He studied her face for a moment. You should eat something, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. After he left, Dahlia tried to follow his advice, but sleep eluded her. The weight of leaving the only home she'd ever known pressed down like a physical burden. Outside her window, Idaho City continued its evening routines as if her world wasn't crumbling around her. Morning came too quickly. Dahlia had just finished her tea when a commotion outside drew her to the window. Drake's wagon was pulling up, but behind it was a group of men, including Mayor Holloway and Sheriff Turner. She opened the door before they could knock. Gentlemen, I still have one more day according to your notice. Plans have changed, the mayor announced, his tone smug. We've had a cash offer for this property, and the buyer wants immediate possession. Sheriff Turner is here to ensure a smooth transition. Drake stepped between Dahlia and the men. That wasn't the agreement, Mayor. Miss Larson has until tomorrow. Stay out of this, Quinn, Sheriff Turner warned. This doesn't concern you. I'm making it my concern, Drake replied, his voice level but with an edge of steel. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster. Don't make me arrest you for interfering with official business. Dahlia placed a restraining hand on Drake's arm. It's all right. I can be ready today. The last thing she wanted was for Drake to get into trouble on her account. Drake looked down at her, concern evident in his eyes. You sure? She nodded, though her heart was pounding. Yes, most of it's packed anyway. The men waited outside while Dahlia and Drake hastily finished loading her belongings. The printing press remained in the corner, too heavy and cumbersome to move in such a rush. I'll have to leave it, she said, her voice cracking as she ran her hand over the smooth metal one last time. Drake watched her, his expression troubled. I'm sorry, Dahlia. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite everything, it sent a small thrill through her. Within 2 hours, everything that could be transported was loaded onto Drake's wagon. Dahlia took one last look around the home where she'd grown up, memories flooding through her mind, her father teaching her to set type, her mother baking bread in the kitchen, the long nights spent writing by lamplight. It's time, Drake said gently. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Outside, a small crowd had gathered to witness her departure. Some looked sympathetic, others triumphant. Dahlia held her head high as she walked to the wagon. Mayor Holloway stepped forward, holding out his hand. The key, Miss Larson. She dropped it into his palm without a word and climbed onto the wagon seat beside Drake. As they pulled away, she refused to look back, keeping her gaze fixed on the road ahead. They had traveled several miles in silence before Drake spoke. Where to, Miss Larson? The question hung in the air. Dahlia had been so focused on the leaving that she hadn't fully considered the going. I'm not sure, she admitted. I thought I'd take the stage to Boise, then perhaps the train to Denver. Drake nodded, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. That's one option. Is there another? She asked, curious. He seemed to deliberate before answering. My uncle's ranch has a small cabin on the north end of the property. It was the original homestead before he built the main house. It's simple, but it's solid and private. Dahlia stared at him, uncertain she was understanding correctly. Are you offering me a place to stay, temporarily, he clarified, until you decide your next move? No one from town ever comes out that way. The offer was unexpected and generous, perhaps too generous. Why would you do that for me? Drake kept his eyes on the road. Because what they did back there wasn't right, and because. He hesitated, then continued more firmly, because I believe in what you're fighting for. Dahlia considered his offer. The idea of having some time to regroup before making her next decision was appealing. And if she was honest with herself, the thought of saying goodbye to Drake Quinn so soon after meeting him left an inexplicable hollow feeling in her chest. "I wouldn't want to cause trouble between you and your uncle," she said cautiously. "Uncle Robert is a fair man, and he's no friend to the mining company. They've been trying to buy his water rights for years." Dahlia weighed her options. The stage wouldn't leave for Boise until the day after tomorrow anyway. Perhaps a few days at the Quinn ranch would give her time to form a proper plan. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Drake. I accept your offer, but only for a short while." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Of course, just until you find your feet." They traveled north, away from town and deeper into the rugged landscape. The wagon jostled over the uneven road, but Dahlia barely noticed. Her mind was too full of the events of the past few days, the uncertain future, and the enigmatic man beside her. "Tell me about your uncle's ranch," she said, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. Drake's expression lightened as he spoke about the rocking Q Ranch. "Uncle Robert started with just 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle after the war. Now he's got over 1,000 acres and one of the finest herds in the territory. He raised me after my parents died in a fire when I was 10. "I'm sorry," Dahlia said softly. "About your parents." Drake nodded in acknowledgement. "Uncle Robert's a good man, strict but fair, taught me everything I know about ranching." "And you enjoy the work?" she asked. "Most days," he replied with a small smile, "though I've been thinking lately about getting a place of my own. Maybe up north toward the Salmon River Valley." Dahlia found herself wanting to know more about him, this quiet, thoughtful man who had stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. "Have you always lived in Idaho?" "Born and raised," Drake confirmed. "My father worked the silver mines before he saved enough to buy a small spread. That's where I learned to respect the land and the water that sustains it." He glanced at her. "That's why your articles about the mining company resonated with me. I've seen firsthand what their practices do to the watersheds." The conversation flowed easily between them as the wagon wound its way through the hills. Dahlia found herself relaxing for the first time in days, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Drake was easy to talk to, and his calm demeanor was a balm to her frayed nerves. By late afternoon they crested a hill, and Drake pointed to a sprawling valley below. "There it is, the rocking Q." Dahlia leaned forward, taking in the sight. The ranch was larger than she had imagined, with a large 2-story main house, several barns and outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, and horses grazed in a paddock near one of the barns. It was beautiful and peaceful, so different from the tension-filled streets of Idaho City. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Drake nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "The cabin's about a half-mile beyond the main house, near that stand of cottonwoods." He pointed to a cluster of trees in the distance. They followed the road down into the valley and approached the main house. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair emerged onto the porch as they drew near. "That's Uncle Robert," Drake said quietly. "Let me explain the situation to him." Dahlia nodded, suddenly nervous. What if Drake's uncle didn't want her on his property? What if he sided with the town council? Drake pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, approaching his uncle with a confident stride. Dahlia couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the older man's expression shift from curiosity to concern as Drake spoke. After a few minutes, Robert Quinn looked over at her, his gaze appraising but not unkind. Drake motioned for her to join them. Taking a deep breath, Dahlia climbed down from the wagon and walked over, extending her hand. "Mr. Quinn, I'm Dia Larson. Thank you for allowing me to impose on your hospitality." Robert Quinn's handshake was firm. "Miss Larson, Drake's been telling me about your situation. Sounds like the town council is overstepping their bounds." Relief washed over her. "You're not concerned about harboring a troublemaker?" A smile creased his weathered face. "Miss Larson, I've been called worse than a troublemaker by better men than Mayor Holloway. You're welcome to stay in the old cabin as long as you need." "Thank you, sir. I don't intend to stay long, just until I can arrange passage to Denver." Robert nodded. "You take the time you need. Drake, why don't you get Miss Larson settled while I have Rosa prepare some food for you to take over?" Drake agreed, and they returned to the wagon. As they drove toward the cabin, Dahlia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Your uncle is very kind. He believes in doing what's right, not what's easy," Drake replied. "He read your articles too, said you've got gumption." Dahlia couldn't help but smile. "Is that a compliment coming from him?" "The highest," Drake assured her with a grin. The cabin came into view as they rounded a bend. It was small but sturdy looking, built of logs with a stone chimney. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, and nearby, a small stream burbled its way through a grove of trees. "It's not fancy," Drake said as he brought the wagon to a stop, "but it's solid and private." "It's perfect," Dahlia breathed, already charmed by the rustic dwelling. Drake helped her down from the wagon and led the way to the cabin door. Inside was simple but comfortable: a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A door led to what Dahlia presumed was a bedroom. "The pump outside has good water," Drake explained. "There's firewood stacked on the back porch, and the outhouse is just beyond that pine tree." Dahlia walked around the space, trailing her fingers over the smooth wood of the table. "This is very generous, Drake. I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," he said, his voice gentle. "Let's get your things inside before dark." They worked together, unloading the wagon, bringing in her trunks and boxes. Drake built a fire in the hearth while Dahlia unpacked some essentials. By the time Robert Quinn's housekeeper, Rosa, arrived with a basket of food, the cabin had begun to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a place where Dahlia might catch her breath. "I should head back to the main house," Drake said as dusk fell. "Will you be all right here alone?" Dahlia nodded. "I'll be fine. I'm used to taking care of myself." Drake hesitated at the door. "I have to ride into town tomorrow for supplies, but I'll check on you when I return." "Thank you, Drake, for everything." After he left, Dahlia sat in the rocking chair by the fire, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday, she had been facing eviction. Tonight, she was sitting in a cozy cabin, safe from immediate threat. And it was all because of a quiet cowboy who believed in standing up for what was right. As she drifted off to sleep in the small bedroom that night, Dahlia realized that, for the first time since the town council meeting, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. The next morning, Dahlia awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't her bedroom in town. Then the events of the past days rushed back, and she remembered where she was. The old cabin on the rocking Q Ranch. She rose and dressed, then explored her new surroundings in the clear light of day. The cabin was rustic but clean, with a few touches that suggested someone had prepared it for her arrival: fresh linens on the bed, a vase of wildflowers on the table, a stack of split wood by the fireplace. Outside, the morning was crisp and beautiful. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwoods and pines, with mountains rising in the distance. The stream she had glimpsed yesterday ran clear and cold nearby, perfect for washing and drawing water. It was peaceful in a way Idaho City never was, with only the sounds of birds and rustling leaves to disturb the quiet. Dahlia spent the morning unpacking and organizing her meager possessions. She had brought her writing desk and supplies, determined to continue her work even without a press. Perhaps she could send articles to newspapers in Boise or even Denver. The mining company's illegal dumping was a story that deserved to be told, regardless of whether she had her own newspaper to print it. Around midday, a horse approached from the direction of the main ranch house. Dahlia stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun, expecting to see Drake. Instead, a young woman rode into the clearing, leading a second horse laden with packages. "Miss Larson," the woman called, dismounting with easy grace. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark hair and Quinn's same storm gray eyes. "Yes," Dahlia confirmed. "And you are Dia Quinn," the woman smiled, extending her hand. "Drake's cousin. Uncle Robert sent me with some supplies and to check if you needed anything." Dahlia shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze so similar to Drake's. "It's nice to meet you, Deanna. Your family has been incredibly kind." Deanna began unloading packages from the packhorse. "Drake told us what happened in town. The council had no right to run you out like that." "You've read my newspaper?" Dahlia asked, helping to carry supplies inside. "Every issue," Deanna confirmed. "Your piece on women's suffrage last month was particularly good. Made Uncle Robert harumph a bit, but he couldn't argue with your logic." Dahlia smiled, warming to the young woman immediately. "And what do you do on the ranch, Deanna?" "Bit of everything," Deanna replied, placing a sack of flour on the kitchen table. "I keep the books, help with the horses, ride fence when needed. Uncle Robert raised me alongside Drake after my parents died in a cholera outbreak." "I'm sorry for your loss," Dahlia said sincerely. Deanna nodded in acknowledgement. "It was a long time ago. Uncle Robert made sure Drake and I had a good home." They continued unpacking the supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, beans, potatoes, and other staples. There were also some unexpected items: a quilted blanket, books, and a small vase of fresh wildflowers. "Rosa thought you might like these," Deanna explained, arranging the flowers. "And I brought some books from the house library. Drake mentioned you had to leave most of your father's collection behind." Touched by the thoughtfulness, Dahlia examined the volumes: a collection of Wordsworth's poetry, a novel by Mrs. Gaskell, and a book on the history of the Idaho Territory. "Please thank Rosa for me, and you're very kind to think of the books." Deanna waved away her thanks. "Drake said you're a writer, thought you might get bored out here with nothing to read." "Speaking of Drake," Dahlia ventured, "he mentioned he was going into town today." "Left at dawn," Deanna confirmed. "Should be back by supper time depending on what Mayor Holloway and his cronies are up to." Dahlia felt a pang of concern. "I hope he doesn't face trouble because of me." Diana's expression turned serious. "Drake can handle himself. But you should know, there's been talk in town. The mining company isn't happy about your articles, and they've got the council in their pocket." "That's why I was writing about them," Dahlia sighed. "Their influence over local politics is troubling." "Well, you've got allies here," Deanna assured her. "Uncle Robert has no love for Sinclair mining. They've been trying to pressure him to sell water rights for years." After helping Dahlia put everything away, Deanna prepared to leave. "I should get back to the ranch. Is there anything else you need?" Dahlia considered. "Actually, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'd love some paper and ink. I left most of my supplies behind." "I'll bring some tomorrow," Deanna promised, mounting her horse. "And Miss Larson, don't worry too much about Drake. He's got a good head on his shoulders." As Deanna rode away, Dahlia couldn't help but reflect on how quickly her circumstances had changed. Just days ago, she had been alone in her fight against the mining company and the town council. Now, unexpectedly, she had found allies in the Quinn family. The afternoon passed slowly. Dahlia tidied the cabin, then took a walk along the stream, letting the peacefulness of the setting soothe her troubled thoughts. When she returned, she began writing in one of the notebooks she had managed to bring, jotting down everything she remembered about the mining company's operations and the evidence she had gathered. As dusk approached, she heard hoofbeats again. This time, it was Drake, riding a tall bay horse and leading a heavily laden pack horse. He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Evening, Miss Larson," he called, removing his hat. "Hope you found everything comfortable." "Very much so," she replied, coming down from the porch to help him. "Your cousin Deanna brought supplies earlier. Your family has been extraordinarily kind." Drake began unloading the pack horse. "Deanna mentioned she'd stopped by. I hope she didn't talk your ear off." "Not at all. I enjoyed her company." Dahlia noticed that among the packages were several that looked like books. "What's all this?" Drake's expression turned solemn. "I went by your house in town. The new owner wasn't there, so I took the liberty of retrieving a few more of your belongings." Dahlia's heart quickened. "My books," he nodded, untying a carefully wrapped bundle. "As many as I could fit in my saddlebags. And this." He handed her a small wooden box that she recognized immediately, her father's prized possession, a writing set with his initials engraved on the silver inkwell. Tears sprang to her eyes as she opened it, finding everything intact: the inkwell, pens, seal, and wax. "Drake, I don't know what to say," she whispered, running her fingers over the familiar objects. "This means more to me than I can express." His eyes softened as he watched her. "I thought it might be important to you." "It was my father's," she explained, wiping away a tear. "A gift from my mother on their wedding day. I thought I'd lost it forever." Drake continued unloading his packages, which included more food supplies, a small keg of kerosene for her lamps, and to Dahlia's astonishment, a wooden crate containing her portable writing desk with her personal papers still inside. "How did you manage all this?" she asked, amazed. "Let's just say the new owner wasn't expecting visitors, and his guard dog took a liking to the beef jerky in my pocket," Drake replied with a hint of mischief in his eyes. Dahlia laughed, the sound surprising her. It felt like ages since she had found anything amusing. "Was there trouble in town?" she asked as they carried everything inside. Drake's expression darkened slightly. "Some talk, nothing worth repeating." "About me?" she pressed. He hesitated, then nodded. The mining company's manager was buying drinks at the saloon, talking about how they'd finally silenced that troublemaking woman journalist. Dahlia's jaw tightened. "I'm not silenced yet." Drake looked at her, something like admiration in his eyes. "No, I don't suppose you are." They worked together to put away the supplies and arrange her rescued books on a small shelf near the fireplace. As the cabin grew darker, Drake lit the lamps and built up the fire. The domestic scene felt strangely comfortable, as if they had done this many times before. "I should get back to the ranch," Drake said finally, though he made no move to leave. "Uncle Robert will be wondering where I am." Dahlia nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Of course. Thank you again, Drake, for everything." He reached for his hat, then paused, his expression turning serious. "There's something else you should know. While I was in town, I overheard some men from the mining company talking. They're planning to expand operations near the Eastern Creek, right where you reported the water contamination." Dahlia's pulse quickened. "Did they say when?" "They're bringing in new equipment next week. Once it's operational, the damage to the watershed will be 10 times worse. We have to stop them, Dahlia said automatically, her journalist's instincts flaring. There must be something we can do. Drake studied her for a long moment. That fighting spirit is what got you run out of town in the first place. And yet here you are, bringing me information, she countered. Why tell me if you don't think we should act? A slow smile spread across his face. I never said we shouldn't act. Just pointing out the risks. The word we hung in the air between them, full of significance. Dahlia felt a surge of hope, not just that they might stop the mining company, but that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. I have evidence, she said, moving to her rescued writing desk. Testimonies from farmers, water samples, records of livestock deaths. If we could get this information to the territorial governor or the federal land office in Boise. Drake nodded, his expression thoughtful. My uncle knows the territorial representative. He might be willing to help. For the next hour, they sat at the cabin's small table, Dahlia sharing her research while Drake offered insights about the local waterways and which ranchers might be willing to speak out against the mining company. The lamp burned low as they talked, their heads bent together over maps and notes. Finally, Drake rose reluctantly. I really should go, it's getting late. Dahlia walked him to the door. Will you come back tomorrow? We could continue planning. I'll be here, he promised, settling his hat on his head. He paused at the threshold, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. Dahlia, be careful. The mining company has powerful friends. So do I, it seems, she replied softly. His eyes warmed at that, and for a breathtaking moment, Dahlia thought he might say something more. Instead, he simply nodded and stepped into the night. She watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode away, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the darkness. Inside the cabin once more, Dahlia found herself unable to sleep despite the long day. Her mind raced with possibilities. The mining company's expansion plans confirmed everything she had been writing about. They had no regard for the environmental damage they were causing, only profit. And now, with Drake and potentially his uncle as allies, she might have a chance to stop them. She lit a candle and sat at her writing desk, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. If she couldn't publish her newspaper anymore, she would write letters to the territorial governor, to congressional representatives, to larger newspapers in Boise and Denver. The story of corruption and environmental damage in Idaho City needed to be told. As she dipped her father's pen into the inkwell, a sense of purpose flowed through her. The town council might have driven her out, but they hadn't silenced her voice. And now, unexpectedly, she had found someone who believed in her cause, a quiet cowboy with integrity in his eyes and courage in his heart. Morning came with a light rain pattering against the cabin roof. Dahlia awoke to find several completed letters on her desk, where she had fallen asleep writing. She stretched, working the stiffness from her neck, and moved to build up the fire. The cabin was chilly, but there was something comforting about the sound of rain and the small, contained space that was becoming her temporary home. After breakfast, she continued writing, losing track of time until a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Robert Quinn standing on her porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Mr. Quinn," she greeted him, surprised. "Please come in out of the rain." The rancher stepped inside, removing his hat. "Miss Larson, hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she assured him, quickly clearing papers from the table. "Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer for your hospitality." "That would be welcome," he nodded, taking a seat as she busied herself at the stove. Robert Quinn had a commanding presence that filled the small cabin. Unlike Drake's quiet intensity, his uncle radiated a more overt authority, tempered with the wisdom of years. He accepted the cup she offered with a nod of thanks. "Drake tells me you've uncovered some troubling activities at the Sinclair Mining Company," he said without preamble. Dahlia sat across from him, hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. "Yes, sir. They've been dumping waste into the Eastern Creek for months. I've documented livestock deaths, contaminated water, even illness among farmers who use that water." Robert sipped his coffee. "And now they plan to expand. According to what Drake overheard in town, yes." The rancher studied her over the rim of his cup. "You understand that continuing this fight puts you at risk. The mining company has powerful friends in the territorial government." "I do," Dahlia acknowledged, "but I can't ignore what I know is happening." Robert nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something for him. "Drake said you were gathering evidence to send to the territorial governor. I was hoping your connection to the territorial representative might help ensure the evidence is taken seriously," Dahlia admitted. "James Westfield," Robert confirmed. "We served together during the war. He's a good man, believes in doing things right." He paused, considering. "I'm riding to Boise next week on ranch business. I could deliver your evidence personally." Hope surged through Dahlia. "That would be tremendous, Mr. Quinn." "Call me Robert," he said, setting down his cup. "Anyone who's willing to risk what you have to stand up for the truth deserves that courtesy." "Thank you, Robert," she replied, touched by his words. The rancher's expression grew serious. "There's something else you should know. Drake rode into town again this morning to see if he could learn more about the mining company's plans." Dahlia's stomach tightened with concern. "Is that wise, after yesterday?" "Drake can handle himself," Robert assured her, though a flicker of worry crossed his face. "But there's been talk in town about you, rumors that you didn't leave willingly, that you're planning some kind of retaliation." "That's absurd," Dahlia protested. "I was given no choice but to leave." "The truth rarely matters when powerful men feel threatened," Robert said grimly. "The mining company manager, Sinclair, has been stirring things up, claiming you're spreading lies about his operation." Dahlia's hands clenched around her cup. "They're not lies. I have water samples, testimonies." "I believe you," Robert interrupted gently. "And so does Drake. But you should know that Sinclair has hired men to watch the roads around Idaho City. I believe he's concerned about exactly what you're planning, getting evidence to the territorial authorities." The implications of this were chilling. "Do you think they would try to stop us by force?" Robert's expression was grave. "Sinclair has a lot to lose if the federal government investigates his operation. Men like that don't play by the rules when their profits are threatened." Dahlia absorbed this information, her journalist's mind already calculating the risks and possibilities. "Then we'll need to be careful about how we proceed." "Indeed," Robert agreed, seeming to approve of her resolve. He finished his coffee and rose. "I should get back to the ranch." "Don't worry about Drake, he knows how to avoid trouble." Despite his reassurance, Dahlia couldn't help but feel concerned as she walked Robert to the door. "Please tell him to be careful." The older man's eyes softened. "You care for him already, don't you?" The question caught her off guard. "Aye. He's been very kind. I wouldn't want him to face difficulties because of me." Robert studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Drake's a good judge of character, always has been. And he believes in you, Miss Larson. That's not something he does lightly." After the rancher departed, Dahlia returned to her writing desk, but found it difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting to Drake, wondering if he was safe in town, worrying about what might happen if the mining company discovered his connection to her. It was nearly sunset when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief washed over her as Drake appeared, looking wet but unharmed. She hurried onto the porch to meet him. "You're drenched," she observed as he dismounted. "Come inside and get warm." Drake removed his dripping hat and followed her into the cabin, where the fire had been built up against the chill of the rainy day. "Your concern is touching," he said with a hint of a smile, "but I've ridden in worse." "Your uncle visited earlier," Dahlia told him, taking his wet coat and hanging it near the fire to dry. "He mentioned you went back to town." Drake nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "Thought I might learn more about the mining company's expansion plans." "And did you?" she asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Better than that," he replied, reaching into his vest pocket. "I got these." He handed her several folded papers. Opening them, Dahlia found herself looking at technical drawings plans for new sluices and tailings ponds with dates and locations marked. "Drake," she breathed, studying the documents with growing excitement. "These are internal company plans. How did you get them?" A hint of mischief played at the corners of his mouth. "Let's just say the mining office isn't very secure during lunch hour, and the clerk is sweet on Deanna." Dahlia laughed, shaking her head in amazement. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Quinn." "These plans confirm everything you've been writing about," Drake said, growing serious. "They're deliberately routing waste into the creek, knowing it will contaminate downstream water sources." "This is exactly the evidence we need," Dahlia exclaimed, carefully setting the papers on her desk. "With this, the territorial governor can't ignore what's happening." Drake nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "Uncle Robert mentioned he offered to deliver your evidence to boys." "He did," Dahlia confirmed. "He also warned me that the mining company has men watching the roads. Sinclair's hired guns," Drake agreed grimly. "I saw them in town today, 3 rough-looking men, not local. They were asking questions about you." A chill ran down Dahlia's spine. "About me?" "What kind of questions? Where you went, who you might be staying with?" Drake's expression darkened. "I don't think they know you're here, but they're looking." "I won't put your family at risk," Dahlia said firmly. "Perhaps I should leave." "No," Drake interrupted, his voice sharp. Then more gently, "No, you're safer here than anywhere else right now. The ranch is remote, and we have men who can keep watch." The intensity in his eyes made Dahlia's heart beat faster. "I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me." Drake moved closer, his expression softening. "Dahlia, what you're doing is important. Not just for the farmers and ranchers affected by the contamination, but for everyone who believes in standing up to men like Sinclair who think their money puts them above the law." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. "Why do you care so much, Drake? This isn't your fight." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe it wasn't at first, but now it is. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Dahlia found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the way firelight played across his features, softening the hard angles of his face. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when no one else would." Something shifted in Drake's expression, a warmth, an openness that hadn't been there before. For a breathtaking moment, Dahlia thought he might step closer, might bridge the small gap between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and moved back toward the fire. "We should make copies of these documents," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Keep the originals separate from your other evidence in case anything happens." Dahlia nodded, ignoring the small pang of disappointment. "Good idea. I have paper and ink." They worked together through the evening, making careful copies of the mining company plans. Drake's handwriting was surprisingly neat for a rancher, with a confident flow that matched his character. As they worked side by side at the small table, Dahlia found herself stealing glances at his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the careful precision of his movements. It was well past midnight when they finished. Drake stretched, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness from hours of writing. "That should do it. We'll have Uncle Robert take one set to boys and keep the other hidden here." "And the originals?" Dahlia asked, gathering the papers. "I'll return them to the mining office tomorrow," Drake replied. "If they discover they're missing, it could alert them that we're onto their plans." Dahlia nodded, admiring his foresight. "You would have made a good journalist, Drake Quinn." He smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I think I'll stick to ranching, less likely to get run out of town." The joke broke the tension that had been building between them, and Dahlia laughed. "A wise choice." Drake rose, reaching for his hat. "I should get back to the ranch. Dawn comes early." "Of course," Dahlia said, walking him to the door. The rain had stopped and the night sky was clearing, stars appearing between breaking clouds. "Be careful tomorrow when you return the documents." He paused at the threshold, turning to face her. "Always am." In the silvery moonlight that filtered through the clouds, his eyes were dark and unreadable. Dahlia felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out to him, to make some gesture that would convey the confusing tangle of emotions she was beginning to feel. "Drake," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He waited, patient and still. "Thank you," she finished lamely. "For everything." Something like disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Good night, Dahlia." She watched him mount his horse and ride away, the moonlight casting his silhouette in silver as he disappeared into the trees. Back inside the cabin, Dahlia moved to the fireplace, adding another log even though she wasn't cold. The crackling flames reminded her of the warmth she had seen in Drake's eyes, a warmth that seemed to be growing each time they were together. She was attracted to him, she admitted to herself. Not just grateful for his help, not just impressed by his integrity, but drawn to him as a woman to a man. The realization was unsettling. Her life had been turned upside down, her future uncertain. This was hardly the time to develop feelings for a man she barely knew. And yet, as she prepared for bed, Dahlia couldn't help but replay their evening together in her mind, the easy way they had worked side by side, the understanding that seemed to flow between them without words, the momentary tension when he had stood so close to her by the fire. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, she dreamed of riding across open country with Drake Quinn, free from pursuit, free from fear, with nothing but possibility stretching before them. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Drake would ride over to the cabin, bringing news from town or supplies. They would spend hours working on Dahlia's case against the mining company, organizing evidence, drafting letters to officials, planning how best to present their findings to the territorial governor. Deanna visited often as well, bringing food from Rosa's kitchen and staying to help with the work. The young woman's sharp mind and forthright manner made her a valuable ally, and Dahlia found herself enjoying female companionship after so many days surrounded primarily by men. "You know," Deanna remarked one afternoon as they sorted through testimonies from affected farmers, "I've never seen Drake so invested in something that wasn't ranch business." Dahlia glanced up from her writing. "He's a man of principle. I imagine he'd fight any injustice this way." Deanna gave her a knowing look. "Perhaps, but I don't think he'd ride into town every day to gather information or spend evenings poring over documents for just any cause." Heat crept into Dahlia's cheeks. "We're friends. He's helping me because it's the right thing to do." "Of course," Deanna agreed, though her smile suggested she believed otherwise. "Just as you stayed out here to work on your case, not because you enjoy his company." "Deanna Quinn," Dahlia said with mock severity, "you have a very active imagination." Deanna laughed, unrepentant. "I have eyes, Dia Larson, and so does everyone else on the ranch. The hands are taking bets on when Drake will finally work up the courage to court you properly." "That's ridiculous," Dahlia protested, though her heart quickened at the thought. "We've only known each other a week." "Sometimes a week is all it takes," Deanna replied with a shrug. "My parents knew each other 3 days before my father proposed. Uncle Robert says when it's right, it's right." Dahlia didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "Speaking of your uncle, when does he leave for boys?" "Day after tomorrow," Deanna answered, allowing the shift in conversation. "The male coach would be faster, but he wants to make sure your evidence reaches the right hands personally." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer before Deanna departed for the main house. Dahlia remained at her desk, but found it difficult to concentrate after their conversation. Was it so obvious to everyone that her feelings for Drake were growing? And more importantly, did he feel the same way? That evening, Drake arrived later than usual, looking tired but satisfied. "I found another rancher willing to testify about cattle deaths near the contaminated creek," he announced as he entered. "Big spread southeast of town. That makes 5 ranchers and 7 farmers with documented losses." "That's wonderful," Dahlia exclaimed, taking the signed statement he offered. "With the mining company's plans and all these testimonies, the governor will have to act." Drake nodded, removing his hat and jacket. The familiar gesture had become one Dahlia looked forward to the moment when he transitioned from visitor to something more intimate, someone who belonged in her space. "Uncle Robert leaves the day after tomorrow," he said, warming his hands by the fire. "He'll take everything directly to James Westfield." "And then what?" Dahlia asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind. "Even if the governor acts, even if the mining company is forced to change its practices, I still can't go back to Idaho City." Drake turned to face her, his expression serious. "Do you want to go back, I mean?" Dahlia considered the question. "I miss my newspaper, I miss the work, but the town." She shook her head. "They made their choice when they drove me out." "You could start again somewhere else," Drake suggested. "Boys, perhaps, or Denver, like you originally planned." The thought held less appeal than it once had. "Perhaps," she said non-committally. "What about you, Drake? Will you stay at the Rocking Q forever?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I've been saving to buy my own place. There's good land available up north, as I mentioned before." "Your own ranch," Dahlia nodded. "That sounds like a fine dream." Drake's eyes met hers, something unspoken in their depths. "It is. But lately I've been thinking it might be lonely, running a place on my own." Dahlia's heart stuttered in her chest. Before she could respond, a rapid knocking at the door broke the moment. Drake moved quickly, hand dropping instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Were you expecting anyone?" "No," Dahlia said, suddenly fearful. "Deanna left hours ago." Drake motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. "Who's there?" he called. "It's me, Tom Riley," came the response. "From the north pasture. Mr. Roberts sent me." Drake relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice of one of the ranch hands. He opened the door to reveal a young cowboy, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Mr. Drake, there's trouble," Tom said urgently. "Riders spotted coming up the north road 3 men, armed. Mr. Robert thinks they might be Sinclair's men looking for Miss Larson." Dahlia felt cold fear wash over her. "How would they know I'm here?" "Someone must have talked in town," Drake said grimly. "How far out, Tom?" "Maybe 20 minutes," the young man replied. "Mr. Roberts gathering the hands, but he said to get Miss Larson to safety first." Drake nodded, already moving. "Saddle Miss Larson's horse. We'll take her to the line cabin in the high country." As Tom rushed off to comply, Drake turned to Dahlia. "Pack only what you need: warm clothes, your important papers. We need to move quickly." "Drake, I can't keep running," Dahlia protested, even as she began gathering her things. "And I won't put your family in danger." "They're not after my family," Drake said firmly. "They're after you and the evidence you've collected. Once you're safely away, Uncle Robert can handle them." There was no time to argue. Dahlia stuffed her most important papers into her satchel, along with a change of clothes and her father's writing set. Drake gathered the copies they had made of the mining company plans and added them to her bag. Within minutes, Tom returned with 2 saddled horses. "Mr. Roberts says to take the west trail through the ridge. It's harder to follow." Drake helped Dahlia mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Tell Uncle Robert we're headed to the High Line cabin. We'll stay there until he sends word it's safe." Tom nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Drake." "Be careful, those men looked mean." "We will be," Drake assured him, then turned to Dahlia. "Ready," she nodded, gripping the reins tightly. "Lead the way." They set off at a fast trot, heading west away from the main ranch house. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the trail as they wound their way toward a ridge of rocky hills in the distance. Dahlia glanced back once, seeing the warm lights of the ranch house growing smaller behind them. "Will your uncle and the ranch hands be all right?" She called to Drake, who rode slightly ahead. "Uncle Robert was a cavalry officer during the war," Drake replied over his shoulder. "He knows how to handle trouble, and he has 15 good men with him. Sinclair's thugs won't find a warm welcome." They rode in silence after that, pushing their horses as fast as the rough terrain would allow. The night air grew colder as they climbed into the hills, and Dahlia was grateful for the warm coat she had hastily donned before leaving. The trail narrowed as they entered a rocky pass, forcing them to slow to a walk. Drake led the way, occasionally glancing back to make sure Dahlia was managing the difficult terrain. She was a competent rider, having grown up in horse country, but the steep, narrow path required all her concentration. "Not much farther," Drake encouraged as they emerged from the pass onto a small plateau. "The cabin is just beyond those trees." Dahlia nodded, too breathless to respond. Her heart was pounding from more than just the exertion of the ride. Fear, uncertainty, and a strange, wild exhilaration all mingled in her veins. Despite the danger, despite being forced to flee once again, there was something oddly freeing about riding through the night with Drake Quinn. The line cabin appeared ahead, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a stand of pines. Unlike the cabin where Dahlia had been staying, this one was clearly used primarily by working cowboys during roundup, or when tending distant parts of the ranch. It was basic but solid, with a small corral attached for horses. Drake dismounted quickly and helped Dahlia down. "I'll take care of the horses. Get inside and start a fire, it'll be cold up here tonight." The cabin was simple, one room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs and a narrow bunk against one wall. A shelf held basic supplies: flour, coffee, beans, salt. Dahlia found matches and kindling by the hearth and set about building a fire, grateful for the task to occupy her shaking hands. By the time Drake entered, stamping his boots to remove the dust, the fire was catching well. He carried their saddlebags and Dahlia's satchel, setting them on the table. "Horses are settled," he reported. "I gave them grain from the storage bin outside." Dahlia nodded, still kneeling by the fireplace. "Will we be safe here?" Drake moved to help her up, his hands strong and steady on her arms. "This cabin isn't on any maps, and the trail we took is hard to follow even in daylight. We should be fine until Uncle Robert sends word." Their eyes met in the growing firelight, and suddenly, Dahlia was acutely aware of how close they were standing, his hand still gently holding her arms. The cabin was small, intimate, far more isolated than the one near the ranch house. Drake seemed to realize it at the same moment, releasing her and stepping back. "Are you hungry? There should be provisions here." "A little," she admitted, though food was the last thing on her mind. They busied themselves with practical tasks, Drake checking the cabin's perimeter and securing the shutters, Dahlia preparing a simple meal from the supplies on hand. The domesticity of it calmed her nerves somewhat, though every sound from outside made her startle. As they sat at the small table eating beans and hardtack warmed by the fire, Dahlia finally voiced the question that had been troubling her. "Drake, what if they search the ranch? Your uncle could be in danger because of me." Drake's expression was reassuring. "Uncle Robert can handle himself. And Sinclair's men are bullies, not killers. They're looking to intimidate, not start a war with one of the largest ranchers in the territory." "I hope you're right," Dahlia sighed. "I never meant to bring trouble to your family." "You didn't bring the trouble," Drake said firmly. "Sinclair and his corrupt mining operation did. You just had the courage to stand up to them." His faith in her warmed Dahlia more than the fire. "Thank you for believing in me, for risking so much to help me." Drake's gaze softened as it held hers across the table. "You're worth the risk, Dia Larson." The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Dahlia felt her heart beat faster, unsure how to respond to the quiet intensity in his voice. The moment was broken by a distant sound, a gunshot, echoing from the direction of the ranch. They both tensed, rising from the table. "That could be anything," Drake said, though his hand went to his revolver. "A warning shot from Uncle Robert's men or someone hunting." Two more shots followed, closer together. "Or trouble," Dahlia whispered. Drake moved to the window, carefully peering out through a crack in the shutters. "I don't see anything, but we should be prepared just in case." He checked his revolver, then retrieved a rifle from a rack on the wall, loading it efficiently. "Can you shoot?" he asked Dahlia. "My father taught me," she nodded, "though it's been some years." Drake handed her a small revolver from his saddlebag. "Just in case. I don't expect trouble to find us here, but it's best to be ready." The weight of the gun was unfamiliar in Dahlia's hand. She checked it as her father had taught her, finding it loaded and ready. "Now we wait," Drake said, moving a chair to a position where he could watch both the door and the window. "Try to get some rest if you can. That bunk is more comfortable than it looks." Dahlia knew sleep would be impossible. She sat in the other chair, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Outside, the night had grown quiet again, with only the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind in the pines. "Tell me about Denver," Drake said after a long silence, his voice low in the quiet cabin. "What would you do there if you went?" Grateful for the distraction, Dahlia considered the question. "I'd try to find work with a newspaper, I suppose, or perhaps start my own again eventually, and continue writing about injustice." There was a smile in his voice. "Always," she confirmed. "It's what I know, what I believe in." Drake nodded, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. "You'd be good at it. You have a way with words and more courage than most men I know." "What about you?" Dahlia asked, turning the conversation. "Tell me more about this ranch you want to buy." His eyes lit up as he described his dream, a modest spread in the Salmon River Valley. Good water rights, enough grazing land for a growing herd. As he spoke, Dahlia could almost see at the house he would build, the barns and corrals, the cattle grazing on lush pasture. "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. Drake's expression turned wistful. "It's still just a dream for now. I have enough saved for a small start, but building a successful ranch takes time. And as Deanna likes to remind me, it takes more than one person." "Your cousin seems to have opinions about many things," Dahlia remarked with a smile. Drake chuckled, the sound warming the small space between them. Deanna has never been shy about sharing her thoughts, much like another woman I know. Dahlia felt herself blush. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Quinn?" "The highest," he assured her, his eyes holding hers with newfound boldness. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, the air between them suddenly charged with possibility. Dahlia found herself holding her breath, waiting for what might come next. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Drake was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" he called, positioning himself between Dahlia and the door. "It's Tom, Mr. Drake," came the response. "Mr. Roberts sent me to check on you." Drake relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "What was the name of your first horse, Tom?" There was a pause then. "Freckles, because of the white spots on his rump." Satisfied with the answer that only the real Tom would know, Drake unbolted the door. The young cowboy stood outside, looking tired but unharmed. "Everything all right at the ranch?" Drake asked immediately. Tom nodded, stepping inside. "Yes, sir. Those men came looking for Miss Larson, but Mr. Robert convinced them she wasn't there." There was some shouting, and Mr. Robert fired a warning shot when one of them tried to search the barns, but they left without real trouble. Relief washed over Dahlia. "No one was hurt." "No, madam," Tom assured her. "Mr. Robert knows how to handle such men." Made it clear that the rocking queue wasn't a place they wanted to start trouble. Drake closed the door, securing it once more. "Did they say where they were headed next?" "Back to town, according to Mr. Robert. He thinks they'll report to Sinclair that their search was unsuccessful." Tom removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Mr. Robert says you should stay here tonight just to be safe, but you can return to the ranch in the morning. He's posting men to watch the approaches, just in case." Drake nodded. "Thank you for bringing the news, Tom." "You should get back before it gets any later." "Yes, sir," Tom agreed, replacing his hat. "Mr. Robert also wanted me to tell you that he's still planning to leave for Boise tomorrow. Says the sooner he gets those documents to the territorial representative, the better." After Tom departed, the cabin felt quieter than before, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Dahlia sank into a chair, the tension of the evening catching up with her. "It's over," she murmured, half to herself. "For now, at least." Drake set aside his rifle and joined her by the fire. "For now," he agreed. "But once Uncle Robert delivers the evidence to Boise, the real fight begins." Dahlia nodded, staring into the flames. "I'm tired of fighting, Drake. Tired of looking over my shoulder, wondering who might be coming after me next." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady, grounding her in the moment. "I know, but you're not fighting alone anymore." She looked up, meeting his gaze, finding in it a steadiness that calmed the turmoil within her. "No, I suppose I'm not." They sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Dahlia finally felt her eyelids growing heavy, Drake insisted she take the bunk while he kept watch in the chair. "I'll be fine," he assured her when she protested. "I've slept in worse places during roundup." Too exhausted to argue, Dahlia settled onto the narrow bunk, pulling a rough woolen blanket over herself. Despite the day's events, despite the lingering fear and uncertainty, she felt strangely safe with Drake keeping watch nearby. His solid presence was more comforting than the walls of the cabin or the revolver within reach. As she drifted toward sleep, Dahlia found herself thinking not of the danger they had fled, nor of the uncertain future that awaited them, but of Drake's words about his dream ranch. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to be part of that dream, to build something new, something good, with a man who believed in standing up for what was right. The thought followed her into dreams, where she rode beside Drake across endless open country, free and unafraid, toward a home they would build together. Morning came with golden light filtering through the cracks in the cabin's shutters. Dahlia awoke to find Drake already up, tending a small fire in the hearth with coffee brewing in a battered pot. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile that made her heart skip. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, sitting up and combing her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to tame it. "Did you get any rest?" Drake shrugged. "Enough. Coffee's almost ready." They shared a simple breakfast of hardtack and the last of the beans from the previous night, then prepared to return to the ranch. The morning air was crisp and clear as they mounted their horses. The high country spread out before them in shades of green and gold. "It's beautiful up here," Dahlia remarked as they began their descent. "So peaceful," Drake nodded. "One of my favorite parts of the ranch. In the spring, this whole mountainside is covered with wildflowers." The ride back was leisurely compared to their hasty flight the night before. Drake pointed out landmarks and shared stories of growing up on the ranch, learning to ride in the valley below, getting lost in these same hills as a boy. The time he and Diana had tracked a mountain lion to its den just to see if they could. By the time they reached the main ranch, the sun was high overhead. Robert Quinn was waiting for them on the porch of the main house, his expression one of relief at their safe return. "Glad to see you both," he greeted them as they dismounted. "Any trouble up at the line cabin?" Drake shook his head. "All quiet. Tom said Sinclair's men headed back to town." "So it appeared," Robert confirmed, "though I've kept men watching the approaches just in case." He turned to Dahlia. "You all right, Miss Larson? That was an unexpected complication." "I'm fine," she assured him. "Thanks to your foresight and Drake's quick action." Robert nodded, seeming satisfied. "I'm leaving for Boys within the hour." "Is the evidence ready?" "In my satchel," Dahlia confirmed, retrieving the carefully prepared package of documents. "Everything's organized and annotated. The mining company plans are in a separate envelope." Robert took the package, tucking it securely inside his coat. "I'll make sure James Westfield understands the urgency. With luck, we'll have federal inspectors at the mining site within a week." "And in the meantime?" Drake asked. "What about Sinclair and his men?" "I've sent word to Sheriff Turner in Idaho City," Robert replied. "Made it clear that any further harassment of Miss Larson or trespassing on Rocking Q land will be met with serious consequences." "Will that be enough?" Dahlia asked doubtfully. "The sheriff seemed firmly in the mining company's pocket when I was run out of town." Robert's expression hardened. "Turner might be in Sinclair's pocket, but he's not a fool. The Rocking Q has been here longer than Idaho City, and we have friends in territorial government. He knows better than to let this escalate." The confidence in his voice was reassuring. Robert Quinn was clearly a man accustomed to being heated. "Now," he continued, "I need to finish preparations for the journey. Drake, why don't you take Miss Larson back to the cabin? Rosa's prepared a basket of food for you both." As they rode toward the cabin where Dahlia had been staying, a sense of anticlimax settled over her. After the tension and fear of the previous night, the peaceful afternoon seemed almost surreal. "What happens now?" she asked as they approached the familiar clearing. "We just wait for your uncle to return from Boys." Drake dismounted, coming around to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Now we take a breath," he said softly. "You've been running since they forced you out of town. Maybe it's time to just be still for a moment." The wisdom in his words struck Dahlia. She had been in constant motion physically and mentally since the town council's decree. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps what she needed now was stillness. Inside the cabin, everything was as they had left it in their hasty departure. though someone likely Rosa had been in to tidy and leave fresh flowers on the table. Drake built up the fire while Dahlia unpacked the basket of food, finding enough for several days freshly baked bread, cheese, dried meats, preserves, even a small cake wrapped in cloth. "Your family has been so kind to me," Dahlia said as they sat down to eat. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such generosity." Drake smiled, passing her a slice of bread. "You're fighting a battle that affects us all. Clean water, honest government, these things matter to ranchers as much as to townspeople." "Still," Dahlia insisted, "your uncle is riding all the way to Boise on my behalf. You've risked confrontation with Sinclair's men. It's more than most would do for a stranger." Drake's eyes held hers across the table. "You're not a stranger anymore, Dahlia." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through her chest. No, she wasn't a stranger to the Quinns now, especially not to Drake. In the span of just over a week, he had become something important to her, something she wasn't yet ready to name but couldn't deny. After they ate, Drake suggested a walk along the stream that ran near the cabin. The afternoon was mild, the sun casting dappled light through the trees as they followed the burbling water. "I've been thinking," Drake said as they walked side by side, "about what happens after all this is resolved." Dahlia glanced at him, curious. "What have you been thinking?" He stopped, turning to face her. "I've been thinking that I don't want you to go to Denver." Her heart skipped a beat. "Oh," Drake took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "The thing is, Dahlia, I know we've only known each other a short time. But in that time, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever met. Your courage, your principles, your determination." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I find myself wondering if there might be a place for you here. Not just on the ranch, but in my life." Dahlia felt as though the world had suddenly narrowed to just this moment, just this man standing before her with hope and uncertainty mingled in his eyes. "Drake," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you," he interrupted, the words rushing out as if he feared losing his nerve. "And I'm asking if you might consider staying. Not just until this business with the mining company is settled, but after, with me." Joy bloomed in Dahlia's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "About not wanting to leave. About you." Drake stepped closer, tentatively reaching for her hands. When she offered them freely, he enfolded them in his own. "I know it's fast. I know there's still uncertainty ahead. But when you were driven out of town and I said I was riding out with you, I meant it then, and I mean it now. Wherever you go, whatever you face, I want to face it with you." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes. "No one has ever stood by me like you have. No one has ever believed in me the way you do." "Then believe this," Drake said, his voice low and fervent. "I love you, Dia Larson. And if you'll have me, I'll spend every day proving it." In answer, Dahlia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but as Drake's arms came around her, drawing her closer, it deepened into something that felt like a promise, like coming home after a long journey. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Drake rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "Yes," Dahlia whispered, her heart full to bursting. "Yes to staying. Yes to us. Yes to everything." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the future suddenly bright with possibility where before it had seemed shrouded in uncertainty. That evening, as they sat before the fire talking of dreams and plans, Dahlia felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't experienced in years. The fight against the mining company wasn't over, the consequences of her outspokenness still unfolding. But for the first time since being driven from her home, she felt as though she had found a new one, not in a place, but in a person. 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet days and tender evenings. Drake rode to the cabin each morning, sometimes staying late into the night as they talked, planned, and grew closer with each passing day. Deanna visited often, delighted by the development between her cousin and Dahlia, while Rosa kept them well supplied with food from the main house. Word came from Robert Quinn 5 days after his departure, sent by telegraph to the nearest town and delivered by a ranch hand. He had met with James Westfield and presented the evidence. The territorial representative was deeply concerned and had immediately arranged a meeting with the governor and federal land officials. "They're sending inspectors," Drake reported excitedly after reading his uncle's message. "Federal men, not local, to examine the mining operation and water quality. Uncle Robert is returning with them." Dahlia felt a surge of hope. "So it worked. We're being heard." "Thanks to your courage and persistence," Drake affirmed, taking her hands in his. "You never gave up, even when they drove you out." The next news came 3 days later. The federal inspectors had arrived at the Sinclair Mining Company and found conditions even worse than Dahlia had reported. Operations were temporarily suspended, pending a full investigation. "Sinclair is furious," the messenger reported. "Word in town is he's blaming Miss Larson for his troubles, saying she conspired to ruin him." Drake's expression darkened at this news. "Is he making threats?" "Not directly," the ranch hand replied. "But Mr. Roberts says it might be wise for Miss Larson to remain at the ranch until things settle." Dahlia had no objection to this plan. The cabin had become a home to her, and with each day that passed, her feelings for Drake grew deeper, more certain. They spent long hours together, talking of the future, of the ranch Drake hoped to buy, of the newspaper Dahlia might start in a friendlier town. Sometimes they rode across the rocking queue together, Drake proudly showing her every hill and valley of the land he loved. It was during one such ride, a month after Dahlia had first arrived at the ranch, that Drake brought her to a high ridge overlooking a particularly beautiful valley. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he told her as they dismounted. "I used to come here as a boy when I needed to think." Dahlia took in the panoramic view: rolling hills, the silver ribbon of a distant river, mountains blue hazed on the horizon. "It's breathtaking." Drake took her hand, leading her to a flat rock where they could sit side by side. "I wanted to share it with you, and I wanted to tell you something." His serious tone made Dahlia turn to face him. "What is it?" Drake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I received a letter from the land office yesterday. That property I told you about in the Salmon River Valley, it's mine." Dahlia's eyes widened. "Drake, that's wonderful. Your dream ranch, you've secured it," he nodded, a smile breaking across his face. 500 acres to start, with an option for more as I can afford it. Good water rights, timber for building, pasture for cattle." "I'm so happy for you," Dahlia said sincerely, squeezing his hand. "When will you start building?" "That depends," Drake said, his expression growing more serious. He opened the leather pouch, tipping its contents into his palm, a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It depends on whether the woman I love will come with me, whether she'll build that dream with me as my wife." Dahlia's breath caught in her throat. "Drake." "Dia Larson," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Dahlia's vision as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Drake Quinn, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they pulled apart, Both were laughing and crying at once, overcome by the moment and the future it represented. "When?" Dahlia asked, admiring the ring that now adorned her hand. "When shall we be married?" "As soon as you're ready," Drake replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Though Uncle Robert will insist on a proper celebration at the ranch." The mention of celebrations sobered Dahlia slightly. "What about Idaho City, the mining company?" "It still isn't resolved completely." Drake nodded, understanding her concern. "The federal investigation is ongoing, but Uncle Robert's latest letter said Sinclair is likely to face criminal charges. The town council is backpedaling, claiming they were misled about the environmental damage." "And my eviction, the newspaper," Dahlia pressed. "That's part of what I wanted to tell you," Drake said. "The new federal marshal assigned to oversee the investigation has declared your eviction illegal. The property is rightfully yours if you want it back." This news stunned Dahlia. After weeks of accepting that her life in Idaho City was over, the possibility of return was unexpected. "I don't know what to say." Drake watched her carefully. "You could restart the newspaper, continue the work you believe in Idaho City, after everything that happened." Dahlia wasn't sure she could face the people who had turned against her so readily. "Or somewhere else," Drake suggested. "Maybe closer to our new ranch. The nearest town is small but growing. They don't have a newspaper yet." The thought was appealing, a fresh start in a new place, but still doing the work she loved. "We could do that. Live on your ranch, and I could start a newspaper in the nearby town." Drake smiled, clearly pleased by her enthusiasm. "Our ranch. And yes, I think it would be perfect. You could continue fighting for justice with your words, and I'd be raising cattle and horses. We'd build a life that honors both our callings." Dahlia leaned into his embrace, her heart full. "It sounds perfect. Though I think I'd still like to reclaim my property in Idaho City, even if just to sell it properly. I won't let them win by taking what's rightfully mine." "That's my girl," Drake said proudly. "Still fighting." They rode back to the cabin hand in hand, making plans for their future: the wedding, the move to the new ranch, the newspaper Dahlia would establish. The uncertainty that had clouded her future when she was first driven from town had transformed into a clarity of purpose and joy that she had never expected to find. Robert Quinn returned to the ranch 2 days later, bringing news that federal charges had been filed against Sinclair and several members of the Idaho City Town Council for corruption and environmental violations. Mayor Holloway had resigned in disgrace. "The town's in quite an uproar," Robert reported over dinner at the main house that evening. "Half the citizens are claiming they never supported your eviction, Miss Larson. The other half are angry at being deceived by the mining company about the water contamination." "And my property?" Dahlia asked. Drake mentioned the federal marshal declared the eviction illegal. Robert nodded, passing her an official-looking document. "This is the formal declaration. Your house and newspaper are legally yours again. The mining company's stooge who bought it has already left town." Dahlia accepted the paper with mixed emotions. It represented a victory, certainly vindication of her stance and restoration of what had been wrongfully taken. But it also reminded her of the pain and betrayal of being driven from her home. "There's something else you should know," Robert continued. "The citizens who oppose the council's actions have formed a committee. They're asking for you to return to restart the newspaper. They're offering financial backing." Drake looked as surprised as Dahlia felt. "Really?" "After everything that happened, people recognize the truth when it finally comes to light," Robert said simply. "And many of them feel ashamed for not standing with Miss Larson when it mattered." Dahlia considered this unexpected development. "I'm grateful for the offer, but Drake and I have made other plans." She reached for her fiancé's hand, drawing strength from his touch. "We're going to start fresh at the new ranch and in the nearby town." Robert smiled, seeming pleased by this decision. "I thought you might say that. But I believe you should at least visit Idaho City once more to close this chapter properly, and perhaps to show them what they lost when they drove you away." The wisdom in his suggestion resonated with Dahlia. Perhaps she did need that closure to return on her own terms, head held high, no longer a woman fleeing in disgrace but a journalist vindicated. "Will you come with me?" she asked Drake. "Every step of the way," he promised without hesitation. They rode into Idaho City a week later, Dahlia wearing her best dress, Drake by her side. The town looked the same as when she had left it, yet somehow smaller, less intimidating than in her memory. People stopped to stare as they rode down Main Street, whispers following in their wake. Their first stop was Dahlia's former home and newspaper office. The building stood just as she had left it, though neglected in her absence. Inside, a layer of dust covered everything, but her printing press remained in the corner, untouched. "They didn't even sell it," she remarked, running her hand over the familiar machine. After all that. Drake watched her move through the space, giving her time to absorb the moment. "What do you want to do with it?" Dahlia considered. The printing press held so many memories, her father teaching her the trade, late nights working on stories, the satisfaction of seeing truth in print. "I'd like to take it with us," she decided, "for the new newspaper." They spent the morning inventorying what remained and what could be salvaged. Around midday, a knock came at the door. Drake opened it to reveal a small delegation of townspeople, led by a woman Dahlia recognized as Mrs. Bennett, the schoolteacher. "Miss Larson," Mrs. Bennett began hesitantly, "we heard you had returned. We wanted to welcome you and apologize." Dahlia approached the door, standing beside Drake, drawing strength from his presence. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Bennett." "It's more than kind, it's necessary," the schoolteacher insisted. "What the council did to you was wrong. Many of us knew it at the time but were too afraid to speak up." She gestured to the others behind her, the blacksmith, the baker, several farmers Dahlia recognized. "We're ashamed of our silence." "The mining company had us all fooled," the blacksmith added gruffly, "or intimidated, but that's no excuse for not standing with you." Their sincerity was evident, and Dahlia felt some of the hurt she had carried begin to ease. "I appreciate your words," she said. "Truly." "We understand you're not planning to stay," Mrs. Bennett continued. "Mr. Quinn's uncle mentioned you have plans elsewhere. But we want you to know that Idaho City is poorer for losing you and your newspaper. And we want to help with your new venture," the baker added, stepping forward to present an envelope. "It's not much, but it's a contribution from those of us who believe in what you were doing. A subscription fund of sorts for your new newspaper wherever you establish it." Touched by the gesture, Dahlia accepted the envelope. "Thank you. This means a great deal to me." After the delegation departed, promising to spread word of her vindication throughout the town, Dahlia turned to Drake with tears in her eyes. "I didn't expect that." He drew her into his arms, holding her close. "You made an impact here, Dahlia. Even those who were too afraid to stand with you respected what you were doing." They spent 2 more days in Idaho City, arranging for the printing press and Dahlia's remaining possessions to be transported to their new home. Word of her return spread quickly, and many townspeople came forward with similar apologies and expressions of support. By the time they prepared to depart, Dahlia felt a sense of closure that she hadn't thought possible. On their final evening in town, as they shared a meal at the hotel restaurant, Drake raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes warm with love. "And to standing up for what's right," Dahlia added. no matter the cost. Their glasses clinked, the sound crystalline and bright with promise. Dahlia looked at the man across from her, the quiet cowboy who had said, "Then I'm riding out with her," when everyone else had turned away, and felt a surge of gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken. "I love you, Drake Quinn," she said softly. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "And I love you, Dia Larson, soon to be Dia Quinn." They were married 2 weeks later at the Rocking Q Ranch, with Robert Quinn officiating and Deanna serving as Dahlia's maid of honor. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the ranch hands who had become friends, and even a few reformed citizens of Idaho City who made the journey to wish them well. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, Dahlia thought of the day the town council had ordered her to leave, how dark the future had seemed, how alone she had felt. She could never have imagined then that their cruel decree would lead her to this moment, to this man who now placed a ring on her finger and promised to love her all his days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Robert declared, beaming with approval. "Drake, you may kiss your bride." As Drake's lips met hers, sealing their union with a kiss both tender and passionate, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that sometimes what seems like an ending is merely the beginning of a far greater story. Their journey to the Salmon River Valley began a week after the wedding. The wagon train was impressive, one wagon for their personal belongings, another for the printing press and newspaper supplies, a third loaded with building materials and tools. Drake rode beside the lead wagon, while Dahlia alternated between riding her mare and sitting beside the driver. The journey took nearly 2 weeks, winding through mountains and valleys, crossing streams and navigating rough terrain. Each evening, they made camp beneath the stars, and Dahlia would write in her journal by firelight, documenting their journey to a new life. When they finally crested the last ridge and the valley spread out before them, Dahlia gasped at its beauty. Rolling meadows stretched toward a broad river that glinted silver in the sunlight. Stands of pine and aspen dotted the landscape, and in the distance, snow-capped mountains rose majestically against the sky. "Welcome home," Drake said, reaching for her hand as they surveyed their domain. "What do you think?" "It's even more beautiful than you described," Dahlia breathed, taking in the pristine landscape. "I can see why you've dreamed of this place." They made camp that night on their own land, beside a clear stream that would provide water for their future home and ranch. As they sat by the fire, Drake unrolled the plans he had drawn for their house, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch, large windows to capture the valley views, and most importantly to Dahlia, a room specifically designed for her newspaper office. "It will take time to build," Drake cautioned. "We'll live in a temporary cabin at first while the main house is constructed." Dahlia smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they studied the plans by firelight. "I don't mind. We're building something lasting, Drake. That's worth the wait." The next morning, work began in earnest. The men Drake had hired set about constructing the temporary cabin, while others began clearing land for the main house. Drake was everywhere at once, directing, helping, planning. Dahlia established her own domain, organizing their supplies and preparing for the newspaper she would launch once they were settled. The nearest town, Silver Creek, was a half-day's ride away, small but growing, with a general store, saloon, church, and a handful of other businesses. When Dahlia rode in with Drake to introduce themselves and arrange for supplies, they were welcomed warmly. "A newspaper," the general store owner exclaimed when Dahlia mentioned her plans. "That's just what this town needs. We've been posting notices on the store wall, but it's hardly efficient." "And when might we expect the first edition of?" the church minister prompted. "The Silver Creek Chronicle," Dahlia supplied, having decided on the name during their journey. 2 months, perhaps, Drake estimated. Once the cabin is built and the press is set up. Interest in their venture spread quickly through the small community. By the time they departed for their homestead, Dahlia had promises of advertising from nearly every business in town and a list of potential stories to pursue. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The temporary cabin was completed within 3 weeks, a simple but comfortable structure with 2 rooms and a covered porch. Drake and his men began work on the main house immediately after, while simultaneously constructing corrals for the horses and preparing for the cattle that would arrive in the fall. Dahlia established her printing press in a corner of the cabin and began work on the inaugural edition of the Silver Creek Chronicle. True to the principles that had defined her journalism in Idaho City, she focused on community news, but also dedicated space to issues of importance beyond the town's borders: environmental concerns, territorial politics, women's rights. The first edition was published in early September, to great acclaim in Silver Creek and surrounding homesteads. Dahlia had worried that her outspoken style might meet the same resistance it had in Idaho City. But the frontier community seemed to appreciate her straightforward approach and unwavering commitment to the truth. "They're different here," Drake observed one evening as they sat on their cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "Less established in their ways, more open to new ideas. Or perhaps they simply haven't had time to develop the kind of entrenched corruption we fought in Idaho City," Dahlia suggested. "Either way, I'm grateful for the welcome." Drake pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "They recognize quality when they see it in your newspaper and in you." As autumn approached, the main house began to take shape, the framework rising against the sky, promising the home they had planned together. Drake's first cattle arrived, a small herd to start but healthy and strong. Each day brought new progress, new achievements, new reasons to celebrate the life they were building. Their first winter in the valley was harsh but beautiful. Snow blanketed the land, transforming the landscape into a white wonderland. The temporary cabin proved snug and warm, with the printing press moved to a small outbuilding Drake had constructed specifically for that purpose. Dahlia continued publishing the newspaper, though less frequently during the worst of the weather, while Drake worked with his small crew to care for the cattle and continue construction on the main house whenever conditions permitted. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Dahlia often reading aloud from books they had brought from Idaho City or new ones ordered from Denver. Sometimes Drake would play the harmonica, a skill Dahlia hadn't known he possessed until one quiet night when he pulled the instrument from his saddlebag and filled their cabin with sweet, haunting melodies. It was during one such evening, as January's fierce winds howled outside their snug cabin, that Dahlia shared her newest discovery. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting aside the book she had been reading. Drake looked up from the bridle he was mending, something in her tone catching his attention. "What is it?" Dahlia moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "I went to see Dr. Wilson in Silver Creek yesterday while you were checking the north pasture." Concern immediately creased Drake's brow. "Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" "I'm not ill," she assured him, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Quite the opposite, in fact. Drake, we're going to have a baby. In early summer, Dr. Wilson thinks." For a moment, Drake seemed frozen, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise. "A baby, we're having a baby," Dahlia nodded, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Yes, our first child." Drake gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "Dia Quinn, you have made me the happiest man alive, first by agreeing to be my wife and now by making me a father." His joy was infectious, washing away the small worries Dahlia had harbored about how their busy lives would accommodate a child. "You're pleased then?" "Pleased," Drake laughed, the sound rich and full. "I'm elated, overjoyed, ecstatic." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child, a little person who is part you, part me." That night, as they lay in bed planning for this new addition to their family, Dahlia marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From the frightening day when she had been ordered to leave Idaho City, to this moment of perfect happiness in a cabin on land she and Drake now called their own, it was a journey she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Drake murmured, his hand tracing gentle patterns on her shoulder. "I'm thinking about beginnings and endings," she replied truthfully. "About how what seemed like the end of everything in Idaho City was really the beginning of something far better." Drake drew her closer. "When I told you I was riding out with you that day, I had no idea where the road would lead. I just knew I couldn't let you face it alone. And now look at us," Dahlia smiled. "A home, a ranch, a newspaper, and soon a child." "A family," Drake corrected softly. "Everything I ever wanted, and some things I didn't even know to wish for." Spring brought renewed energy to the valley. The snow melted, revealing fresh green grass pushing up toward the sun. Work on the main house resumed with vigor, and by April, the structure was nearly complete, a handsome two-story home of timber and stone that would serve them for generations to come. Dahlia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she found herself needing more rest as her body changed to accommodate their growing child. Drake was attentive and protective, sometimes excessively so, which became a source of gentle teasing between them. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Dahlia would remind him when he insisted on carrying even the lightest packages or forbade her from riding into town. "Humor me," he would reply with a smile that melted her resolve. "It's my first time being a father-to-be." Despite his protectiveness, Drake respected Dahlia's determination to continue working on the newspaper throughout her pregnancy. He built her a comfortable chair for the printing office and hired a young man from Silver Creek to handle the more physically demanding aspects of printing. But the words and the editorial decisions remained firmly in Dahlia's control. In late May, as Dahlia's time grew near, they moved from the temporary cabin into the newly completed main house. The transition was bittersweet. The cabin had been their first home together, the place where they had weathered their first winter and received the news of their coming child. But the new house, with its spacious rooms and thoughtful design, represented the future they were building. Their son was born on a perfect June morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and the scent of wildflowers drifting on the breeze. Dr. Wilson had come from Silver Creek the previous evening, sensing that Dahlia's time was near, and remained through the night as labor progressed. Drake stayed by Dahlia's side throughout, his steady presence a comfort during the difficult hours. When their son finally arrived, announcing himself with a lusty cry, the joy on Drake's face was beyond description. "He's perfect," Drake whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Robert Daniel Quinn, Robert for Drake's uncle who had done so much to help them, and Daniel for Dahlia's father. The infant had Drake's dark hair and Dahlia's green eyes, a combination that both parents found irresistible. News of the birth spread quickly. Diana arrived from the rocking queue within days, eager to meet her new cousin and help Dahlia during her recovery. Robert Quinn followed a week later, his normally stern countenance softening completely when he held his namesake. "You've done well, both of you," he told Drake and Dahlia, pride evident in his voice. "Not just with this fine boy, but with everything you've built here." Life settled into a new rhythm with baby Robert's arrival. Dahlia reduced her work on the newspaper temporarily, but continued to write and edit from home while caring for their son. Drake divided his time between the growing ranch operation and his family, often working with the baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle he had crafted himself, placed in the shade nearby. The Silver Creek Chronicle flourished, becoming not just the voice of the local community, but a respected publication throughout the territory. Dahlia's unwavering commitment to truth and justice remained the cornerstone of her editorial policy, though she found her perspective broadened by motherhood, adding new depth to her writing. Drake's ranch grew steadily as well. By the end of their second year in the valley, his cattle herd had tripled in size, and his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock was spreading. He added sheep to their operation, despite the traditional antipathy between cattle and sheep ranchers, believing that diversification would provide stability in uncertain times. Their family grew again 3 years later with the arrival of a daughter, Grace Deanna Quinn, born during a spectacular autumn thunderstorm. Young Robert, now a sturdy 3-year-old with his father's quiet determination and his mother's inquisitive mind, was fascinated by his baby sister from the first moment. "She's so small," he observed with childish wonder, gently touching Grace's tiny fingers. "Was I that small, Mama?" "Just as small," Dahlia confirmed, watching her children with a heart full of love. "But you grew strong and tall, and so will she." Drake, standing beside the bed with his arm around his son's shoulders, caught Dahlia's eye over the children's heads. The look they exchanged was one of profound gratitude and joy for each other, for their children, for the life they had built together from what had once seemed like an ending. News eventually reached them of further developments in Idaho City. The mining company had been forced to implement extensive environmental protections and pay substantial fines. Several town council members had been removed from office, and a new newspaper had been established, one that prided itself on independence and integrity. "They finally learned the lessons you tried to teach them," Drake remarked when Dahlia shared these updates from a letter she had received. "Better late than never," Dahlia replied without bitterness. Time and happiness had healed those wounds, leaving only the satisfaction of knowing that truth had ultimately prevailed. 10 years after leaving Idaho City, the Quinn Ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, and the Silver Creek Chronicle was recognized throughout the territory for its excellence. Drake and Dahlia had added a third child to their family, another son, William James, and their home was filled with love, laughter, and lively discussions around the dinner table. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Drake had said, "Then I'm riding out with her." They stood together on the ridge overlooking their domain, the sprawling ranch house, the well-kept barns and corrals, the cattle and sheep grazing peacefully on lush pastures, the printing office where Dahlia still produced her newspaper with the help of a small but dedicated staff. "Did you ever imagine this?" Dahlia asked, leaning into her husband's embrace as they watched their 3 children playing near the creek below. That day in Idaho City, when everything seemed to be ending, Drake's arms tightened around her. "I knew I wanted to help you. I knew I admired your courage and principles. But this," he gestured to the life they had built together, "this exceeds any dreams I might have had." Dahlia turned in his arms to face him, studying the beloved features that had only grown more dear over the years, the smile lines at the corners of his eyes, the touch of silver at his temples, the warmth in his gaze that had never dimmed. "I'm still outspoken," she noted with a smile. "Still saying things that some people don't want to hear." "And I'm still riding with you," Drake replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown that first time by the stream, every step of the way. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, they walked hand in hand down the hill toward their home and children. The path ahead was clear and bright, built on courage, integrity, and the love that had begun when a quiet cowboy had stood beside an outspoken woman and chosen to follow where her principles led. What had seemed like an ending had been merely the first page of their story, a story still being written, day by day, in the life they had created together.